Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. It was a definitely eventful weekend of football we had this weekend. Some great games, and it should be definitely a Super Bowl to remember, I think. So that's going to be good. And we just also found out that there was nobody elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame for the first time since 1960. So that was interesting, too. So definitely been an interesting few days of sports. I hope everyone is having a great start to their week and a great Tuesday. I am excited to bring you another episode of Boston Balling, and I would like to introduce you guys to my guest for this week. He's very accomplished in the sports field. He's really passionate about football and definitely really knowledgeable about the Patriots. So I wanted to welcome him in today. His name is Evan. Evan, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Gabby. How are you?
Doing well, yeah. We're definitely excited to have you on the show. I'm really excited when you said you would come on. So definitely appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Always appreciating their bomber. You know, you got to get the IC alum in there. So definitely, no problem.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like Ithaca Bombers have to stick together. So that's just a known fact there that if you're an Ithaca Bomber, you stick with other Bombers and travel together.
100%.
So why don't you start by just telling everybody kind of, you know, what you do for work, how you got involved with sports and everything like that.
Yeah, so I'm a Patriots beat reporter for CLNS Media in Boston. Basically, I would say around middle school time, you know, I grew up watching Around the Horn. Pardon my take. Pardon my interruption. Excuse me. Pardon my take. Of course, is the new version. My whole upbringing, you know, was centered around sports and sports media, and just seeing those people up on TV on ESPN just get to talk sports and just dish takes all day. I was like, how do you get to do this? You know, how can I get to do that? And that's when I learned about the journalism field, and that most of those guys had started out and gals had started out as beat reporters and sort of worked their way up to columnists, you know, to ESPN and all that kind of stuff. So I went to Ithaca Park School of Communications. Then I graduated and have been covering football ever since.
Yeah, that's awesome. It definitely is a great school for sports media. I think we both can vouch for that. Definitely a great program with a lot of opportunities when you come out and when you graduate. So how long have you been doing this for?
So I've been covering the Patriots for 3 years now. But I've been covering football and the NFL in general since I graduated. So been basically my whole professional career on football, but specifically being on the beat with the Pats 3 years. I like to call it 2.5 though, because this past COVID year didn't really count. Wasn't the full experience, unfortunately. But yeah, it's been great, and obviously I was spoiled to see the tail end of Brady's Patriots career. So that was a great way to kind of come into the beat. My very first year on the beat was when they won the Super Bowl against the Rams. So that was a pretty good first season. I don't know if I'm ever going to top it again. I'll probably cover the team for my whole life and might never see another one. So well, let's hope that's not the case. But at least right now it feels like it could be.
I know. I really hope that's not the case either. But that's awesome, especially with that being your first year. I'm sure that was probably a great experience to have to be part of and everything. And that probably just being part of that experience probably was like, wow, yeah, this is probably going to be a really cool job.
I know, right? I thought right off the bat that was, I kept on telling myself that wasn't going to be the norm, and I wasn't going to go to the Super Bowl every single year and get to cover it. But it felt like in the moment I was like, wow, this is the best job ever. Not that it hasn't been great since, but obviously the endings of the seasons have just been very different. And it is though, honestly, covering the Patriots in a Super Bowl year, covering Brady, that was probably I can't think of anything more to say other than a dream come true at that point in time. So it was very, very cool. And it's not a job. Look, if you want to make millions of dollars and you want, you know, do that and go be a tech, you know, nerd or something like that and be a CEO, go do that. This is not a job you do necessarily for money, but you do it because you love it and because you love sports. And for me personally, I just couldn't see myself doing one of those desk jobs. It definitely have to be something on the move and something interesting like this.
Yeah, no, totally. It's definitely a really rewarding field to be in. And like you said, people don't come into this field because they want to make a lot of money. It's you do it because you're passionate about it and you love sports and you want to be a part of sports every day. And sometimes the hours aren't exactly what people want either, but that's just how working in the sports field works. So it's definitely, it definitely has pros and cons, but overall it's such a rewarding experience. I feel like to be able to be surrounded by sports every day and do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me still that I wake up every morning and get paid to talk about sports all day, and that's what I've always wanted. So you kind of make it's a sacrifice that you make for your own happiness, I guess, in terms of just like I said, I just don't think other jobs give you that same excitement every single day, fulfillment every single day. And you kind of put up with some things, obviously. Not everybody's nice to you. Not everybody's nice to you on Twitter, stuff like that. But you live with that for the trade-off for sure.
Yeah, definitely. The Twitter thing I can definitely relate to because there's some people on social media that can be a little tough, but that just comes with, being in the industry.
Yeah, you kind of that's going to come, and it's something that you have to deal with. But at the same time, I don't think we normalize the fact that media members are just sort of expected to deal with the backlash. And granted, if you say something stupid or if you have a bad take and people let you know it's a bad take, then that's one thing. But in terms of just doing your job, especially women in our industry, it's not okay, and we shouldn't normalize the fact that people are doing that behind mostly keyboards on the internet, where you can't really put a face to the comment. And you're certainly, a lot of people I think say stuff to me that if we were face to face, they'd be like, "Oh, I love your work." It's like, "Oh, really?" Because last week you were telling me to piss off or whatever. So it's definitely something I don't think we should normalize for sure.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I do think you do a great job. I think you're very knowledgeable about everything, and I think it's just kind of something that working in the sports field that you need to just know is part of it, and just be able to just stick through it and be confident and trust your ability and your skills. And I think that's a great thing that anybody can take from that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's certainly something that you go along the process and you realize, like, these people on your phone that are saying a bunch of things about you or whatever, they're a very, very small minority of the population. And you go out and people don't recognize you from Twitter, right? Like, it's not like somebody's gonna know you, be like, "Oh, you're that asshole on Twitter." No, that doesn't happen. So, like, you just have to remember that that's like still a very, very small piece of the population. And sometimes we lose sight of that too, not even on this level, just in terms of, like, I just feel like all these Patriots fans think the sky is falling and they should fire Bill and all this kind of stuff, when in reality, 75% of Patriots fans are probably a little bit more even keeled about the situation. So sometimes you get caught up in thinking that everybody's opinion on Twitter matters when it really doesn't.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's totally a really good point. It's like we can't just weigh too heavily what people say on social media apps and everything else. And as long as we know that we're confident and we know what we're talking about and we know what we're trying to get across, then that's all that really matters. And people do appreciate that. So definitely something that's a good lesson for everybody that wants to work in the sports media industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I think a lot of people get responses, women especially, to just get thicker skin, don't let it bother you, stuff like that. And that's not okay either. And we shouldn't be just saying, "Oh, you should just take it," just take the insults, take the harassment. No, this is harassment. That's exactly what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, me being a female in sports, I've experienced a lot of that myself. So it definitely is something that I can relate to, but I'm confident and I'm just doing my thing. So people will appreciate that and some people might not, but that's okay. So that's just how it is with working in sports. But I do, on that note, want to dive in here on the show for today. So before we kind of dig deeper into the Patriots off season, I do want to ask your thoughts on something, because this is a very, very, I find with Patriots fans, a very mixed thing. Some people feel one way about it, some people feel another way about it. But with Brady being in the Super Bowl again this year with another team, if he loses, do you think that it shows that maybe he needs Belichick, or do you think that he's already proved at this point that he doesn't need Belichick anymore? Because I know that there's a lot of people that are conflicted on this subject.
It's definitely the subject that we're all talking about right now. It's become almost like a boxing match of Brady versus Belichick, right? And which one means more, and what all this means with Brady and Tampa Bay, and what that says about Bill and Bill's season versus Tom's season. And I think the biggest thing that you see with Tom, especially in Tampa, is that we sometimes talk about how much Brady brought to Tampa by bringing his skills, obviously, and his leadership and his voice and his presence. But the Bucs did a lot for Brady also, right? The Bucs put him in an offense that had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin already. Then they agreed to trade for Rob Gronkowski and pull him out of retirement because Tom asked them to. Then he asked them to sign Antonio Brown, and they did that. Then before Antonio Brown, he asked them to sign Leonard Fournette, and they did that, right? Yeah. And then they did all the things that Brady wanted them to do and set him up in this perfect Tom Brady created bubble in Tampa Bay with a great defense. And I think when you look at the Patriots roster right now, Bill Belichick felt, and I'm not saying a lot of people want Bill Belichick to kind of say or admit that he shouldn't have let Tom Brady go. But I think in true reality, they sort of felt like they needed to hit the rebuild button and the reset button on the franchise. They had the Bills had come due in the cap situation. There wasn't a whole lot of wiggle room for them to add to the roster to go for another run with Brady in 2020. And they were sort of at a career crossroads with Brady, where at 43 years old, he needed to be someplace else. He needed to be in a situation that was ready to win now. And New England sort of needed to start to turn the page. And you want to hold on to that Brady years for as long as you possibly can, but you also don't want to completely mortgage the next 10 years after Brady just because you went all in again on him, for a couple of seasons towards the end of his career.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that a lot of people are saying, well, I hope that Belichick is watching this game and feeling really stupid by not paying Brady what he wants to be paid and by not keeping him there. But in the grand scheme of things, you do have to look at the long-term consequences of that. And we know that Brady likely isn't going to be in the league for that much longer. I mean, at least we assume. But he's Brady, and every time you think he might retire, he doesn't. And he says, I still want to play for a few more years. But realistically, he's probably almost done playing. So then if you had kept Brady and you invested all of that money and that time into Brady, then it's kind of like where are you left long term? And they are facing that problem right now because of Brady leaving and the quarterback situation being shaky, and realizing that there's a lot of rebuilding that needs to happen, which probably would have had to happen anyway. And I just almost wonder if they would be in this position right now where Brady is, had they kept him this year, would they maybe have been able to make a run and seen the Chiefs in the AFC playoff game maybe and possibly, possibly made a run for the Super Bowl if they did keep Brady this year? And part of me says yes because it's Brady, but part of me says no because he still didn't really have the weapons to succeed that any other quarterback would have to succeed. So even if they did have Brady this year, you have to wonder. I'm sure that they would be a playoff team this year if they still had Brady. I don't think they would have a losing record like they did. I don't think that would have happened. I think with the circumstances and having Brady as your quarterback, I think they probably would have been a playoff team. I still don't think they would have been as good as the Bills, but I think they could have gotten a playoff spot had they had Brady. And would they have been able to make a run for the Super Bowl? Probably not, just with how good the Chiefs and the Bills really were looking this year. So it's definitely a hard situation, I think, to watch Brady play another Super Bowl in another uniform. But at the same time, for me, I just feel like I can't help but cheer for him because of everything that he did for New England.
Yeah, and I think in a way, when Bob Kraft said that he sort of gave Tom Brady his blessing to go, right? They had that meeting a few days before free agency, and Bob Kraft said, if this is what you feel you should do, it is best for you, then do it. And I think that the main thing that Bob Kraft saw was that Tom wanted to keep winning games. He wanted to keep competing for Super Bowls. And at some point for the organization, they needed to turn the page and they needed to start looking ahead. And you can't just keep on going 1 year deal, 1 year deal, 1 year deal on the quarterback at 43 and not left with nothing at some point. Now we're left with nothing this offseason. It was a weird season with COVID and all that kind of stuff. They had a bunch of opt-outs. They had no cap space. So I think the biggest thing that they were able to do was clear the cap, right? And they were able to reset their cap so that now going into this offseason in 2021, they have the capability to pretty much do anything. Anything's on the table. They could trade for any quarterback, they could sign any wide receiver. They have all the money in the world to do whatever they want. And I think that's something that they needed to do eventually. Maybe we can argue that maybe it was a year too soon because Brady's still playing so well. But again, I think you said it too. If Tom Brady with Jacoby Myers and N'Keal Harry and Damiere Byrd, Rizzo or Devin Asiasi at tight end, is that Tom Brady going to be playing in a couple weeks in the Super Bowl? I highly doubt it. I think that this is a situation where he really went to a tailor situation for him, and he was in the point of his career where he was in the right to do that. The Patriots felt like they needed to sort of turn the page, and it kind of worked out for both teams in a way. I know that's crazy to say because the Patriots had such a bad season, but they did what they wanted to do by resetting the cap, resetting their roster, and starting the rebuild process. So in a way, they did do what they wanted to do in 2020.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree with you, and that definitely leaves a lot of room for them this offseason. This is going to be one of their most important off seasons they've had in a long time, and there's a lot that they can do this year. There's so many quarterbacks this year whose futures are questionable in their current situations that they're in now. So this is going to be a really interesting year just to see where all of these quarterbacks might end up. I mean, I know Aaron Rodgers hinted in his press conference after the game on Sunday that his future is uncertain. And with that situation, I almost feel like, in a way, we knew he was frustrated because they drafted a quarterback in the first round when they could have drafted another receiver for him or something like that, and just not waste a first round draft pick on a quarterback. In a way, I know they were, they're trying to think about the future when they don't have him anymore, but I know he was super frustrated. And he does like Bill Belichick, I know. So there's some talk going around that maybe Aaron Rodgers lands with the Patriots. But do you realistically think that would happen? Because I honestly think that right now this is all kind of talk and he's going to end up staying in Green Bay. Because how do you leave those weapons that you have? How do you leave those weapons behind as frustrated as you are with the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's going to happen, and I expect Rodgers to be playing in Green Bay next year. Now, at some point, Rodgers might come available in the next 2 or 3 years when they might have a Jimmy G. Brady situation down the road with Jordan Love. And if you're Rodgers, it's very understandable why you're frustrated with the organization, because you were just a few plays away from making the Super Bowl. If the team invested in a position where they could have an immediate need at wide receiver, maybe, although it's kind of crazy to think of Packers offense that led the league in points or second in points, Kansas City needs another wide receiver, right? But maybe it's a corner or a linebacker or something on the defensive side of the ball or whatever, that a guy that could have come in and made an immediate impact and played on day one, then maybe we're talking about the Packers in the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks instead of Tampa Bay. So that has to be what Rodgers was thinking when he was coming off the field at the end of that game, when he made those comments in the post-game press conference. I got to think he was thinking to himself, well, they drafted Jordan Love instead of getting me some help, and here we are. Here we are. If they had just done what I had asked them to do, or what they should have done, what everybody thought they were going to do, by adding another piece to the puzzle to put Rodgers in the best position to succeed, then maybe we're talking about a different ending for Green Bay's season. And that has to be alarming if you're Aaron Rodgers. And the other thing that has to be alarming is that he saw what he himself did to Brett Favre, right? And he saw the passing of the torch with Brett Favre. And this is the exact same situation. You have a franchise quarterback in place. He's getting up there in age, and they drafted the replacement in the first round. Same exact scenario where a guy like Rodgers, he slipped in that draft. Jordan Love falls in this draft, and it's literally a carbon copy situation. And it worked out so well for Green Bay the first time that I think they kind of got caught up in it, and they were like, oh, we could just keep this thing pulling. It just from Favre to Rodgers, Jordan, and hit ground running when he replaces Aaron. And I think they got sort of trapped in that and didn't think about, oh, well, Brett Favre's career ended without another Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers' career arc right now is following Brett Favre's, where he won a Super Bowl at the beginning of his career and never won one again. So we're sort of in the same exact position now with Green Bay as Favre and Green Bay was in, what was that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I really feel like he's going to play there next year. So the talk of, all of his future being uncertain and the possibility of him going somewhere else, I don't realistically see that happening. So I don't really take Rodgers seriously when it comes to considering quarterback options for the Patriots. But there are, however, a lot of other quarterbacks out there that might be able to fit the mold. And we don't know what a lot of these quarterbacks' future is either. I mean, biggest example right now is Matthew Stafford, who they already know that he's parting ways with Detroit. There's already teams talking to them about him. And, the Patriots' name has been tossed around with him. Then there's Jimmy Garoppolo, who there was a lot of talk that maybe he ends up in New England if Deshaun Watson goes to the 49ers. And so Jimmy Garoppolo, who already knows the system and knows Belichick, but has an injury history that could be concerning. That could be an option. Deshaun Watson, who did say his top choice would be the Jets, ironically. So if Deshaun Watson were to land with the Jets, and then we still have the Bills, who are going to be just as good, or even as they are now, or even the Dolphins, that was another possible option for Deshaun Watson too. He seems to want to go to the AFC East. So the problem is if we see Watson on the Jets or the Dolphins and Josh Allen is there on the Bills, who do you feasibly think out of any of the quarterbacks that are on the table right now would best fit with the Patriots to kind of set them up for success within their division? Because there's a lot of quarterbacks out there that I think could be really good with this team if they had some offensive help.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the biggest thing that you see with this quarterback market is that there's actually more teams that might need a quarterback than have a quarterback that they feel good about in 2021, just across the entire league. So they have I counted 12 teams that are set at quarterback in 2021. That means there's 20 teams that are going to be looking for a quarterback this offseason, and there's going to be a lot of quarterback movement too. And it starts with Deshaun Watson. He's probably the first domino. Then Stafford becomes the second domino, unless Rodgers or Dak Prescott get in there too. Those are four huge names. I mean, that's crazy to think that those four guys could be on the move or could be at least available at some asking price. That's not even including a guy like a Matt Ryan, for example, who might be available as well. So there's going to be a ton of veteran quarterback options. There's four really good quarterbacks in the draft. We know Trevor Lawrence is going to go number one at Jacksonville. But after that, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, those are real viable franchise quarterback types options in the draft. So there is some supply, but at some point the demand is going to outweigh the supply, as it always does. And I think the one advantage the Patriots have is that they have the cap space, right? So a lot of teams across the league, especially if the cap is set at $175 million, which is sounding what it is going to be around, it's going to be sort of a fire sale for a lot of teams to get under that 175 number for 2021. And there are not going to be a lot of teams that are going to be able to take on a big contract like a Matthew Stafford. So we're talking about maybe 4 or 5 teams that even have the funds or the assets necessary to acquire one of these veteran quarterbacks. So you would think that the Patriots aren't going to be bidding against half the league for a guy like a Matthew Stafford. It's probably going to end up being 3 or 4 teams, and I think they can win that bidding war. And if it was me, I would much rather see them trade up in the draft for a quarterback so that we can start talking about a long 10-year sort of run here. But with all the teams ahead of them in the draft order that are going to be looking for those quarterbacks, we could easily see 4 quarterbacks go in the top 10 in April. And it's unlikely that it's are going to jump all those teams to get in there. So maybe the best route is Belichick. It's going to be 69 years old this year. Maybe the best move is to get a guy like a Stafford who they can maximize for the next 3 or 4 years and get another run together for Bill Belichick before he starts to think about retirement.
Yeah, you almost have to wonder which direction they're going to go in. Would they rather trade up and draft a quarterback that they can just kind of build into the system and think about long-term options and say, yeah, this is going to be our franchise guy. He's going to learn this system. He's going to learn under a lot of veteran players in other positions, and he's going to help this team succeed going forward. But knowing that they might not be Super Bowl contenders for a little bit of time until that quarterback really gets adjusted to the league and really learns the system. Or do they want to do what you just mentioned? Do they want to just sign another quarterback that has been in the league a while and won't need to really get acclimated to playing in the NFL, but will just need to learn the Patriots system and just give Belichick a chance to win another Super Bowl before he retires? I think it all just kind of depends on which route they want to take. There's definitely a lot of young quarterbacks in this draft class that I could see working. But again, they have to take advantage of those draft picks in free agency as well, not just at the quarterback position, because there are many other positions that they need to improve on in order to set up a quarterback for success. So no matter what quarterback they do end up going with, whether it's a Matthew Stafford or somebody like that, or they draft a quarterback like a Mac Jones or Trey Lance, somebody like that, whoever they get at quarterback, they still need to address a lot of the other positions because that quarterback still needs offensive weapons to work with. And I think that they can really, really take advantage of free agency this year when it comes to those other positions too.
Right. So that's the ideal scenario for every team, is to find a quarterback on a rookie contract so that you can then go ahead and pay everybody else and put that rookie quarterback in a situation similar to like where it had with the Rams, for example, where he's got Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks in the year they went to the Super Bowl and a great running game. And all you have to do is put the quarterback in there. And basically all he has to do is not screw it up, right? Just run the scheme. Don't screw it up. Get the ball where it's supposed to go. That's all that quarterback needs to do. And you're not asking a whole lot of him. But then there's also sort of the other side of the coin where I think the problem the Patriots could run into if they go with the veteran quarterback option is they have to sell somebody else on coming here with the veteran QB. You're probably going to have to give up a pick to get the quarterback. And the question really is can you put Matthew Stafford in an offense where he can be productive? Because he's certainly not going to be productive as Brady wasn't, as Cam wasn't in the offense that they've been rolling out there the last couple of years. So the thing about the veteran QB option is it does at least account for some of your cap space with the quarterback position. So ideally, like I said, if you could trade up and draft the Trey Lance, then I'm all for that. You can go out there, you can pay any wide receiver, any tight end, anybody that you want in free agency, trade for anybody that you want, and go on sort of a spending spree, really, with $60 million in cap space. And there are a lot of precedent for that working, on differing degrees of success and all of its success. Chicago, for example, did it with Mitchell Trubisky, who has a great team around him. They drag Trubisky every year to the playoffs, it feels like. Obviously, I hope the Patriots do a little bit better than Trubisky, but that's a situation in Chicago where they're still churning out 10, 11 wins per season, and that's nothing to laugh about, right? So that's the Rams, the Bears, they've done it. Certainly teams like Arizona has done it as well. They haven't made the playoffs yet, but they aren't probably able to trade for DeAndre Hopkins and Chandler Jones and pay all these guys if they don't have a quarter that's been Murray. So that's the ideal situation. But when you're picking 15th, it's not necessarily the best spot to be in to have that ideal scenario work out.
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing. And it's funny because you mentioned the Bears and teams like that. And the Bears have a great defense, too, that definitely contributed a lot. And obviously Mitchell Trubisky at the quarterback position wasn't the best quarterback that they could have, but they make it work because there's enough around him to set him up for success. And with the Patriots, they just need enough around whoever the quarterback is to set them up for success. And it was easy, I think, for a lot of people to blame Cam for a lot of the team's struggles this year. But first of all, they had the most COVID opt-outs in the league. So that's another thing I think we need to consider is some of those players possibly coming back that opted out from COVID last year. So that's a factor. And I think just the fact that Cam didn't have really a lot of reliable options to throw to really on the field. And it's hard for any quarterback to, first of all, come into a new team. Second of all, come into a new team in the middle of a pandemic and then get COVID yourself and not be able to play, and then also have to come back after that and just not have a lot of weapons around you. So I don't think that I see Cam really as a solution for the Patriots, but I also don't think that it's fair to really say he was fully responsible for everything going on this year. And the defense also was inconsistent this year too, and I think that's another area that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, so I think that the door is certainly not closed on Cam coming back. And I think the best case scenario, if you bring Cam back, is you get some sort of rookie quarterback that you feel better about than Jared Stidham. And maybe that rookie quarterback is even, I mentioned Trey Lance, that's probably a pipe dream, but he's at the top of the draft. Maybe it's somebody like a Jamie Newman who's getting a lot of buzz out of the Senior Bowl this week, where he's a mobile quarterback and he's a guy that's going to be a dual threat. And you have him come in here, learn under Cam Newton for a year or two. Who's nobody better to learn how to be a dual threat quarterback in the NFL than Cam Newton. So if he can teach one of those young guys to do it, now you have to take your offense as a whole in that direction, right? You have to go all in on the mobile QB, do things, design plays that get the best out of that style of quarterback versus a guy like a Tom Brady. But teams have been successful doing it. It's not impossible. It's certainly a legitimate path. So maybe that's the way that I could see Cam coming back, who's probably only going to take about another 1 year deal worth a couple $1,000,000. Maybe you get some playing time incentives in there if he starts a bunch of games or whatever. It's not going to be costly at all. But if you're going to go the route in the draft of a pocket quarterback like a Mac Jones, who's not a mobile guy, then it doesn't really make sense at all to bring back Cam at that point. If you're you kind of have to go with the same guy, I would say, as the young guy, but maybe it's Newman, maybe it's Lance. Maybe they have eyes on Desmond Ridder in next year's draft out of Cincinnati, who's a great dual threat quarterback. Maybe Justin Fields is somebody that falls in their range that they can trade up and get. So it's possible that Cam returns if that's the scenario, but it's going to have to be, I think, paired with a young quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Jarrett Stidham, that whole situation was just frustrating because we knew Jarrett Stidham wasn't the answer either. So then there was nobody to turn to after Cam that was reliable, and that was an issue. And I think you're totally right. I think if they do end up bringing Cam back, they need to have another quarterback that's starting to learn the system that they can turn to that's more reliable. And the thing about Cam Newton is that, we've seen Cam have really good seasons, and we've seen Cam playing the way that he played in New England, and when he was in Carolina towards the end, it was a similar situation. But we know what he can do when he's at his best, and I think he just needs to be in a situation where he's set up for that success. And the Patriots didn't do a good job of being that system for him this year and really setting him up to grow as a quarterback and develop and basically take this team to where they want to be. And the whole having their first losing season in years, that's tough to swallow, just being a Patriots fan and just being so used to watching this Patriots team play that it's like, oh yeah, they haven't had a losing season since Bledsoe left. Well, yeah, but we know that. But at the same time, we had Tom Brady as the quarterback, and we were spoiled as Patriots fans with that situation, with the Belichick and Brady situation. You're not going to find that everywhere all the time. And I think that the Patriots can find a way to be contenders again next year. They're definitely not out of it altogether already. I think if they just make a few appropriate moves, I think that they can be competitive. I do worry about that Bills team. And I think that they're going to be good for a while. I definitely have Josh Allen's really starting to develop into a good young quarterback, and he has a lot of weapons over there now. So I do worry about them going forward. But I think the Patriots, if they do make these kinds of adjustments and they start to think about long term and what this team can look like 4 or 5 years from now, and they start to think about that now, they should be back to being contenders soon. I don't think this frustration that we saw this year is going to continue. And again, with the COVID opt-outs and the injuries this year, that's another thing that everybody needs to remember and take into consideration too. They're missing some key important players. So it was really a hard season to base everything on. But Belichick really does need to start thinking about the future, and he might be close to retirement and he might want to win another championship before he retires, that's fine. But he needs to start thinking about what this team is going to look like as he starts to think about retiring, and whoever fills his shoes at the head coaching position, what are they going to be working with? And are they going to have a quarterback at that point who's developed enough into the system and is acclimated enough with the players that they have where they can still continue to succeed after he leaves? And I think if anybody can figure that out the right way, it's Belichick. They just need to execute that correctly.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question of how much longer is Bill going to really do this. Only he knows that probably at this point. Maybe Robert Kraft knows it too, but there's probably the only two people on the planet that know how much longer Bill has in coaching. I think it's not imminent, but we're talking about maybe 3 to 5 more years. And I think at some point, if you're Bill, you have to think about it. Do I want to be selfish? Because I have $6 million cap. I have I'll pick draft. If they really want to just rebuild this thing in one off season and go to be super competitive again next year, that's the goal at least. They have the assets and the capability of doing that. They certainly have the coaching, so they can pull it off in one off season and hit the reset button hard and be able to be a playoff team again next year. Will that then short fuse and end up, Bill retires and the team is left with absolutely nothing and the Patriots are terrible for 10 years? I mean, yeah. It could, in theory, that's something that could happen. So it's certainly a question of, and I think a lot of Patriots fans should ask themselves this too: what would you rather? Rather team go for it one more time and trade for a Stafford or a Rodgers or a Watson or whoever it ends up being and try to win a title with Bill Belichick before he retires? Or would you like to kind of still be competitive, obviously, but really be looking at it from a longer term angle?
Yeah, and that's definitely a good question. And as Patriots fans, I think people need to realize that if they go the route of thinking more towards the future, then it might be a little bit of time before we see them win another Super Bowl, but then they'd be more set up for the future, and long term there'd be a lot less frustration. Whereas if they trade for a quarterback and they just sign a veteran quarterback that can help them make a serious championship run before Bill retires, and there might be a lot of frustration after that because then they're kind of back at square one with rebuilding again. And I feel like now more than ever is the perfect opportunity for them to figure that out and figure out what direction they want to go now. And if they really, really want to work on that rebuild now, then we can expect that, yeah, maybe they'll be good enough to be competitive next year and be a playoff team, but just might not be enough to get them all the way because they're going through a lot of changes. So I think that there's kind of that question mark right now. And Bill will never say or give any indication as to where he's leaning. That's just how he is. But yeah, we'll obviously know soon enough, but he just never reveals anything. So for all we know, maybe he already has a quarterback in mind and he has his strategy planned out, and nobody's ever really going to know that until he executes anything. But I saw another interesting tweet of yours actually today about the tight end position, because that's been a question mark this really the entire year because there wasn't a reliable tight end really all season. And there's a couple options I think that they could draft. And obviously Kyle Pitts is the name that everybody's throwing out there right now. But, you kind of indicated that you feel like they might not go for Pitts.
Yeah, so Pitts he's a wide receiver. He's not a tight end. He's a jumbo wide receiver, much more in like I think Travis Kelce gets a bad rap for his blocking, honestly. I think he's gotten better in that regard. I would compare him a little bit more to Darren Waller on the Raiders, where he's just a natural athlete. He's 6'6". He's extremely smooth. He's fast. He's explosive. He can definitely create big plays. He's a great red zone weapon. But at the same time, he's, not your typical hand in the dirt inline blocker. And I don't know how much he's actually going to bring to the table at all as a blocker. If you wanted to project his blocking, I would say his blocking would look a little bit like N'Keal Harry's blocking, which is good. A good wide receiver in terms of blocking, but certainly not Rob Gronkowski or some sort of tight end that is, a very good inline blocker, is basically like a sixth offensive lineman when he's on the field. Kyle Pitts is very, very far away from that. Pat Fryermuth from Penn State is definitely more in that old school Mark Bavaro, Rob Gronkowski type of mold that Bill loves. And I'm not saying that they're going to take Fryermuth in the first round over Kyle Pitts, but I could see them saying, we're going to pass on Kyle Pitts in the first round. We're going to take another player at 15. And then when the draft snakes back around to us at 46, that was when we would maybe take a guy like Fryermuth, who's projected to be a top 50 pick, but might fall a little bit into day 2 and is still that all-around kind of tight end. And the Patriots praise the tight ends like Waller just as much as they praise the tight ends like a George Kittle. But I think deep down, Bill Belichick feels like a guy that can run block and run routes, gives you a lot more versatility and just an ability to be whatever you need to be like they like to do.
Yeah, I think it's going to be that I agree with you. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do there, because that's just a position that ever since Gronk left, it's just been seriously lacking. And it's unfortunate to see it like that, but I think that there's things that they can do to fix that. And, we do have someone in the comments here that said that the Patriots were only 3 plays away from a playoff spot, which is true, but just they didn't have enough to really go far in the playoffs. And there's the COVID guys coming back, granted, will help with that too. But there are still moves that need to be made, and I think that it just kind of, there's a lot of reflection that needs to be done, and obviously with Bill's future being in question too, I think that makes it even more interesting to see how they approach this offseason, because if Bill is close to retirement, he might not want to train a new quarterback that's fresh out of college into the NFL and put that kind of effort into a rebuild. If he's close to being out the door, he might rather just get some veteran guys in there and just try to go for another Super Bowl run, and then leave it up to his successor, whoever that may be, to just kind of work on a rebuild and kind of leave them with that work to rebuild everybody. I just don't know if that's something that Belichick really wants to be involved with or commit to right now, if he's not going to be there for that much longer. So he might just not do that and say, they can handle a rebuild down the road. I want to win another championship before I leave.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question right there. None of us can really figure out what they're going to do with the quarterback position or any of the positions without knowing, is Bill thinking this is a 2 or 3 year rebuild? Is he thinking he's going to rebuild on the fly? Where is his head at in terms of his longevity from his coaching career? We have no idea the answers to any of those questions, and those are probably going to be the driving forces of ultimately all the personnel decisions they make.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree with you there. I think there's a lot of things that are in question, but I do ultimately trust Belichick to make some of these decisions, and I think he's fully aware of where those problems lie, and nobody needs to tell him. I trust that he'll do what's best for this team, and I'm excited for when free agency starts, just to see what they do and the types of players that they go after, because there's definitely a lot of good players out there that and with the cap space, like you said, they can seriously take advantage of a lot of that. And I'm excited for their future. And I just wonder, what would happen with the rest of Bill's coaching staff once he retires, if they would all leave and go to other teams since he's not there anymore, or would they stay and maybe somebody internal would take over at the head coach position? So that's another thing I think to think about too, because there's been multiple times where some people on his coaching staff have left and are now really good coaches for other teams, which could keep happening. But I almost wonder if his whole chain of coaching staff that he has currently leave if he retires, or if they would stay and just kind of help with the rebuild.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there's no promises. That's for sure. Everybody kind of felt like maybe there was a promise to Josh McDaniels. There's no promises to anybody that they're going to be the next guy. It's really going to have to be figure that situation out once we get to it.
Yeah, definitely. But I do think they have a good future regardless of what they decide. I think we can be excited and hopeful that they'll be back in the playoffs next year and we won't have all this frustration, obviously barring injuries or anything else crazy like a pandemic getting in the way of all of that and their success. But I think it's going to be a good off season. I'm excited to see what they do, and I'm definitely excited to watch the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks and just see that that matchup that everybody was looking forward to in Brady versus Mahomes. You couldn't really write the script any other way, and I think that that's going to be a great game to watch too.
Yeah, that'll be a good one. It's going to be tough. I think this Chiefs team is sort of like an inevitable avalanche where you feel like you're in the game. You feel like you're in the game. The Bills are winning the game, nothing in the first quarter in the AFC Championship game, and you feel like you're in it, and then all of a sudden they just explode for like 3 or 4 touchdowns in a row, and all of a sudden you look up and you're down by 3 TDs, and you're like, how did that happen? Right? And that's sort of how this offense feels with KC for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm excited for it. I know everybody else probably is too. It's going to be really sad when football season ends, but at least then we can look forward to the off season and what the Patriots are going to do there. So definitely some good stuff coming. I definitely am looking forward to it.
Me as well. Me as well.
Yeah. Well, I definitely appreciated you joining us on the show. I know that everybody enjoyed this episode. You all know where to find Boston Balling. It's on all podcast streaming platforms. You can follow Boston Balling on social media, so you can find it everywhere. I'll see you guys next week at my usual time. Thank you again to Evan for joining me this week for some good Patriots talk. I know it was really appreciated, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their night. So I'll talk to you all next time. Have a good one.